Welcome back to another intriguing episode of Tiger Bytes, where we delve into what faculty are doing across campus in innovative ways in the online world. Today we're here with Sara Seals, lecturer from the Department of Economics. How are you doing today, Sarah?
I'm great. How are you?
Awesome. Like me, you got to walk across campus today and the azaleas are blooming.
Beautiful.
It's really fabulous. Before we get going talking about your experience with online learning, I just wanted you to talk a little bit about your background. Like, how did you get from there to here?
Right. So I'm from Atlanta, Georgia.
Okay.
I came to Auburn University for my undergrad and essentially loved Auburn so much that I never left. I stayed for my master's degree in economics and my PhD in economics. And while getting my PhD, we would teach classes. And that's when I found this is what I want to do as a career. This is wonderful. So taught while I was in graduate school and then continued on as an instructor for the economics department and now lecturer.
Awesome. What's your favorite thing about Auburn?
Oh, gosh. The students, especially fall semester when it's football season and the whole campus feels electric. And I love the new freshmen. I get a lot of freshmen in my classes. And so just seeing how excited they are to be here just makes me so happy.
I kind of miss the days where, we'd win our first 5 or 6 or 7 games and the excitement would just sort of build and build and build. So hopefully we can get back to that.
Agreed.
If you could talk a little bit about the Auburn First program and also talk about the biggest challenges you faced while developing online courses for the Auburn First program.
So I got to dabble in the online learning experience with COVID, as we all did. And that was right before partnering with Auburn Online in the Auburn First dual enrollment initiative. So I saw kind of what not to do, perhaps first, which is I typically teach Tuesday, Thursday is how it usually works out, my in-person classes. And the 75-minute lecture posted asynchronously for students to watch, that was brutal. Yeah. And you could even see the data on Canvas of how many log in to watch and then how many continue to watch for how long. So I knew that I needed something more exciting for the online asynchronous courses for Auburn Online and the Auburn First program. So partnering with Auburn Online was for this dual enrollment initiative so that high school students can obtain these Auburn University credits. But it needed to be this online asynchronous version as opposed to, logging on to Zoom, as a lot of us did during COVID as well. But because they're in high school, they can't just log on at 10 a.m. for a 75-minute lecture. So how to make what would traditionally be for me these 2 75-minute lectures a week into something that the high school students would enjoy, as well as Auburn University students that they're in these classes as well. But make it more immersive, more exciting, make them want to continue to, watch the videos and read through the content. Also, instructor presence was something that was important for me for an online course because there are Zoom office hours, of course, but how are they seeing me telling these stories and giving these examples? So partnering with Auburn First and the Auburn Online staff, it was so wonderful to hear kind of what had worked for other courses, being able to peruse around and see their other options and seeing like the Learning Glass videos and the Powtoons and, this would be so great for these various examples to really keep the students interested.
Mm-hmm. So in a typical week, you're trying to come up with 150 minutes of instructional material. How does that break down?
Right. This was one of the first things that we talked about. So me and my instructional designer, Amy, who's wonderful, we did the backwards processing, like thinking about what was important to me as the instructor first, like what the students are getting out of it at the end of the semester. And something that she said resonated with her for our entirety of continuing to work together was I wanted them to be able to leave our course and be able to use some of these economic principles in their daily lives. And she said, I love that. Let's continue to incorporate that throughout our course together. So thinking about how do we then break, as you said, these 150 minutes that would typically be in a week? How can we transform that to something that's asynchronous, but that they log on to? So we thought about kind of chunking the material into not just the traditional kind of textbook chapters, but we turned them into modules. So there were some chapters in the textbook that it's just a lot of content, like government policies, et cetera. So I would break some of those more complicated topics kind of down into separate modules. And what has run really smoothly, continues to run really well, is having 12 modules for the semester, plus this kind of module 0 introductory module where they learn this is how the course will flow. So they get these weekly announcements of here's what to work on for this week, but it's on your own time. There are these videos to watch, but it's not something you log on to watch. And it's run really well with these just 12 modules, kind of one-ish every week, but with a 15-week semester, kind of there's a little bit of wiggle room there.
So based on your experience teaching both online and face-to-face, what do you see as the biggest strengths and weaknesses of online learning, particularly for introductory economics classes?
I think as far as strengths go, something, and this is something Amy, my instructional designer, found, which was so cool, and I continue to use this even in my in-person face-to-face courses, is for particularly principles of macroeconomics, where we're learning theories, we're doing supply and demand diagrams, but we're also wanting to look at real-world data. So looking at GDP and across time, it would kind of break up my lectures in person to exit out of the PowerPoint, pull up whichever website we're going to look at. Typically, it's the FRED, Federal Reserve of Economic Data website. And so what Amy found is on Canvas, you can embed whatever these graphs are, these charts, these statistics, and they update as the new data comes out, which is so great for both the online courses and the face-to-face, that I can just have that kind of set in stone wherever it needs to be on the lecture page. And it's showing us, you know, the most recent data of whichever quarter it is, and they can manipulate the data so they can look at a particular time period and scroll. They can zoom all the way back as far as the data goes. And I just think that's so neat and something I wouldn't have known had we not created this online course, that you can embed those so easily. As far as the challenges go, I think I mentioned earlier about instructor presence. It continues to be challenging for particularly the Auburn First, the high school students. I think they feel a little nervous, like hopping on a Zoom call with a lecturer.
Professor.
Right, exactly. So I really try to be engaging in the asynchronous videos that they're watching that introduce each of the modules, what we're going to be talking about, to seem approachable so that they'll want to hop on those Zoom calls. But I think that's my biggest challenge still, is how can I give myself even more to have a bigger instructor presence for these students.
Did you send them weekly emails?
Yes. So weekly announcements plus more. I try to not always be bombarding them with announcements, but they can always guarantee, typically it's been running Monday morning, 8 a.m. Here's what to expect for the week, with just an occasional couple of announcements throughout the week as well.
You just touched on a great point, which is the importance of consistency. You know, students want to know they're getting that email by 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock Monday morning. You know, if you're somebody who's erratic, well, maybe I'll email them Tuesday, you know, it gets people disoriented.
Yes, it helps to be organized and them knowing what to expect. I know how this semester is going to flow after that first kind of couple of weeks, and them feeling really comfortable about that. Yes, I agree.
Yeah, students love that consistency. Yeah, I think we do as faculty too.
I think so.
We've used the terms micro and macroeconomics a few times for the benefit of people who haven't delved into economics before. Maybe you could just define those terms a little bit.
Right. So, and I tell my students this, I think this is in module 1, that we talk about what's the difference in principles of micro versus principles of macro. And so I like to tell them, picture microeconomics is using a microscope or zooming in on the economy. So looking on a more individual level. So it can even go as singular as an individual buyer at the grocery store. How are they making those decisions when the price of eggs change, when the price of orange juice changes? or looking at the buyers in a particular market. So what's happening in the market for oranges or the market for eggs right now with the bird flu happening. And then also one individual seller or in a particular individual market. So all of the firms selling this particular good or service, like how are they making those decisions, et cetera. Whereas I picture and I tell my students, principles of macroeconomics is more so zooming out on the economy. So looking at economy-wide trends, economy-wide phenomenon. So looking at all the firms in a particular country, kind of what is happening in terms of unemployment, the overall price level of all the goods and services in a country, and looking at inflation. So when the price of all of the goods and services being produced increases. So kind of the zooming in for the micro and the zooming out on macro. But what I love, some consistency between the two courses, which I have a lot of students, both Auburn University students and Auburn First students who take both of my courses. And I typically not necessarily recommend, but what I see being helpful is taking the principles of micro first and then the principles of macro. But either way, the module 1 is the same module, which looks at these 10 principles of economics. So it doesn't break it down into micro versus macro. It has everything. And we continue to come back to that framework of these 10 principles throughout the semester, which I think is very helpful for both of the courses.
So, let's talk a little bit about student engagement. How do you modify your approach when teaching Auburn First students online compared to traditional college students? And what strategies have been most effective in keeping them engaged?
That's a great question. Regarding the instructor presence I had mentioned earlier, I do tailor my two courses a little bit separately or a little bit differently in terms of the Auburn University students having their office hours at these set times throughout the week. With the Auburn First students being in high school, I also will offer Sunday afternoon or some kind of weekend office hour time slot, which I think is helpful. And I get a lot of signing up for those office hours. I think it feels much more relaxed that it's a weekend and I'm just hopping on this Zoom call. Also with engagement, Auburn Online showed me the resource of packback discussions. Yeah. And I have found that to be so helpful, so fascinating to see the students discussing amongst themselves, applying the theories that we're learning in class, but to whatever the current events are, whether that be on a really small local level or within their own families, what's happening, or on a broader level. And as far as tailoring to the high school students versus the university students, at first, I would have, if it was a semester for which I was teaching, let's say, principles of micro to both online, to both the university students and the high school students, they were in the same cohort. They were in the same class, technically. And I found that actually dividing those into sections so that it's just the high school students and then just the university students has promoted more engagement amongst the high school students. I think they were intimidating, right? Talking about economic policies, et cetera, with college students who are so much older than them. I think it's been very helpful in promoting engagement.
The high school students that are doing the Auburn First, are they here locally at Auburn, or are they spread throughout the state?
They're spread throughout the state. I get a lot of students who go to high school within Auburn, but it's Birmingham, it's Montgomery, it's all over the state.
One thing I've thought about doing with my online courses, and I just have college students, is some sort of kickoff event in person at the beginning of the semester.
That would be a great idea.
You haven't tried anything like that?
I have not. I have thought about doing a kickoff kind of drop-in situation where everybody can be in the same, but it would be more of a Zoom room is kind of what I was thinking. I've gotten some feedback that you can do I think Doodle Poll is one of the sites that you can do to see what's a good time for everybody. Because that's
not going to find
never.
One. Yeah.
And especially for high school students, but maybe if I did something on a weekend, that could be a good way for them to interact with each other. Another engagement component that I do at the beginning of the semester is housed within that module 0, that introductory module. I have this getting to know you page where it's a discussion post, but it's not related to economics.
Right.
It's, what year are you in school and what are your interests and what's a movie you could watch over again and again without getting bored. And they comment on each other's. And I think that's really great. Something I didn't really incorporate before partnering with Auburn Online.
I have that same sort of discussion board, and one of the things I always ask people is about their dog, or if you don't have a dog, what's your favorite kind of dog? Because people seem to love to discuss dogs.
That's great. I might add that one to mine.
The other thing I do is I give them extra credit if they complete that at the beginning of the semester, and I tell them this is the only extra credit opportunity you're going to have, so take advantage of it. And then inevitably at the end of the semester, oh, can you give me some extra credit opportunities? Go back and look. Sorry, you had it.
Should have told me about your dog.
Should have told me about your dog. I was eager to learn. You didn't do it. So I want to ask you about Powtoons. You mentioned that. And for those of you listening or watching who are not familiar with it, Powtoons is basically cartoons that are customized for content. What sort of role does Powtoons play in your courses?
So when we were designing the course into the 12 modules, one thing that both Amy and I found important was to pick and choose where are we going to place this different type of content. So the Powtoons versus the learning glass videos, which I also found incredibly useful. And so what we chose to do was for each module, sometimes more than one in a module, one per lecture page, I would say. And my modules typically have 2 to 3, maybe even 4 lecture pages based on what the content is. So each lecture page would have a learning glass video. And how I would pick those was to pick the problem, typically math-based or typically having some sort of maybe graph that we're manipulating the supply and demand curves and finding equilibrium, et cetera. So I would pick those more challenging questions that would be within my typical lecture, maybe something that I would go over to the document camera and do by hand. Those would be the types of problems that I would choose to do in the learning glass video. As far as the Powtoons, these cartoons, I wanted to use those to take these concepts that can seem so
esoteric.
Yes, are so
abstract.
hard to relate to, right? And not just talk about, apples and oranges at the store and something, kind of boring, but to say, this is how these students who were Trent and Chen, were our 2 Powtoon students, how they could apply what they were learning in their econ class to real life. And so it would be, my dad has a food truck and he's going to bring it to Auburn University this weekend for the football game. And we're trying to figure out what price we should charge for the tacos or what have you. So that was one example we did. Or something on a individual level, thinking about what is the marginal benefit and the marginal cost of an extra hour of sleep when I've got my exam for the next day.
Nice.
Something that's they can relate to and makes it seem like, this idea, this concept that we're learning about in this online course, I can apply that to my daily life, which I had said was my most important kind of goal for them for the end of the semester, is how can they apply these economic principles, thinking about opportunity costs of some decision, so everything you give up, but really applying it not so they can do well on a test, but so that they can apply it to their daily lives.
You share those Powtoons with the in-class students then as well?
I do.
Yeah.
I do. I think that it's helpful for them to see it.
Sure. And I'm thinking back to when I took, can't remember if it was intro to micro or macroeconomics. It was a long time ago, but almost every class the professor would say, we're building a complex edifice as we develop these concepts. And we're all just sitting there with these glazed over looks. I know what complex is and I know what building is, but I'm not sure what the heck this guy means by edifice. But he's trying to put together the system of interrelated concepts, but cartoons
would
about
make it much more
food
approachable.
Trucks would have made it a lot more understandable for sure. Let's talk about storytelling. I'm a big fan of storytelling. I've actually written some graphic novels.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's very cool.
Thank you. So my understanding is you incorporate a lot of stories into your courses. How does storytelling operate in the online environment? And do you find it more or less effective in the online environment than in the face-to-face?
I think so. With my traditional face-to-face lectures, I give lots of examples. I probably do kind of overkill on examples, but I think that just like with the example of the marginal benefit and marginal cost of an extra hour of sleep, it not only gets their attention with an example instead of just, stating the theory, but something that they can say, oh, okay, now that makes sense with this example that you've given me. So I go kind of overboard with the examples in class. And I always tell them whichever one resonates with you best,
Right,
kind of be
right.
thinking about that. So when we talk about inferior goods, so these are these goods for which, if you look at the textbook definition, when your income goes up, your demand for these inferior goods go down. Well, just simply learning that or putting that on a note card, that's not learning really what we're talking about. So instead saying if we have an example of perhaps for you, because different preferences for different people, but maybe instant ramen could be an example of an inferior good, something typically consumed by a lot in college when incomes are relatively low. And as our income increases, perhaps our demand for the instant ramen decreases.
Let's hope so.
If that were the case for you, then that would be considered an inferior good. But I can see in class, and I'll throw out a couple of other examples too, but kind of that, oh, that resonates with me. And I love that moment. And so how to do that online when I can't see their faces during these, there's no lecture that's being given, is that we would take those examples and put them on the lecture page. And then if there was that really good example, that would become the Powtoon.
Right.
And I think that storytelling of keeping those same characters of the Trent and Chen through not just the principles of micro course, but into the principles of macro course as well. I've gotten good feedback. Like, we love seeing what they continued to do in your macro course. So I think that was really helpful.
The ongoing adventures.
The ongoing adventures of Trent and Chen.
I'm curious how you do assessment in these online courses. You've quizzes, discussion boards.
Great question. So at the end of every lecture page, which there are several of those within the module, at the bottom, we have these self-check quizzes. They're not worth anything towards a grade. And this is typically more kind of almost vocab word definition, just to make sure, like with inferior goods, that is an example that makes sense, that they understand what that is. But really where we're going to see the exam questions come from, and I have 4 exams in my course and then an optional final at the end of the semester. And the exams are multiple choice, but they are all problem-based. They are not, what is the definition of an inferior good? It is, we need to know what an inferior good is, but then use that in some way to solve this problem. Typically, or a lot of my problems will involve graphs or looking at tables or some math involved. So how I get them geared up from the self-check questions to hopefully get prepared for those exams is each module has a quiz. And the quizzes are multiple choice, just like the exams will be. And I think they do a pretty decent job of covering, here are the types of questions that you can expect to see. The module quizzes are open book, open notes. If they wanted to work together, even though they're online, they're welcome to do so. Whereas the exams are all shut down. You can have scratch paper and something to write with, but we use the Respondus monitor, the proctoring software, closed books, closed notes.
So the quizzes are just worth a few points.
Yes. So the quizzes are 10% of their grade. The quiz average. The packback discussion average is 10%, and then the exams hold that bulk of the 80%. But with that optional final at the end of the semester, they can use that to replace their lowest exam score, which is pretty popular.
Now, does packback grade the students or give you a suggested grade?
Yes. So it uses AI not only to grade their questions and responses to each other, but to help them create those questions and responses, which I love. So it has this little AI prompt that kind of pops up on the screen, and it says, this is a run-on sentence. This, you need to cite a source here. This is, different flags and different ways of, here's how you could raise your score, your what we project to be your score on this particular discussion. And then when the assignment closes, I get all of those. But I can still look through. I can change grades if need be. But it does a really good job. I'm very impressed.
Have you conducted or come across any research related to online learning in economics?
Not yet, but Amy and I have discussed potentially working on some research using, because we collect a lot of data, very simply at the end of each module, the students fill out, how helpful was what you learned in this module, how, accurate was the assessment regarding the quiz, et cetera. But all kinds of data that we could collect that could be really interesting. She and I did write a paper just on our collaboration, which will be published in April. So excited about that. But that was more of a reflective essay piece, just saying what we say is a good way to have a productive relationship between instructional designer and subject matter expert, which is my title. But it was really right. But it was fun to work together on another project.
Well, I think that's probably all we have time for today. Thanks for being here, and look forward to seeing what you come up with next.
Great. Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Tiger Bytes. We hope you enjoyed the conversation and gained some valuable insights. Please like, subscribe, and share this podcast with your friends and colleagues. You can find us on all major platforms, and keep learning, keep growing, and we'll see you next time on Tiger Bytes.